Today we are examining an important topic that continues to generate discussion among Iraqi Dinar followers: the possibility of Iraq changing the exchange rate while keeping the current banknote denominations in circulation, versus the alternative of removing zeros from the currency. The comments behind this discussion reflect a common expectation among currency holders. The idea is simple: if the current exchange rate is extremely low and the zeros remain on the notes, a major change in the exchange rate could theoretically create a very large increase in the dollar value of existing dinar holdings. But there is an important distinction between what people hope will happen and what monetary policy actually allows a central bank to do. The statement we are analyzing suggests that some people would prefer Iraq to leave the zeros on existing banknotes and simply change the exchange rate from approximately $0.76 per dinar to something around $1 per dinar. Under that hypothetical scenario, someone holding 5 million dinars could imagine receiving roughly $5 million. However, the same discussion then acknowledges that this outcome is unlikely, and that removing zeros from the currency has been discussed more frequently. That distinction is extremely important because redenomination and revaluation are two very different monetary events, even though they are sometimes discussed as if they were the same thing. When economists talk about removing zeros, they generally mean redenomination. In a redenomination, a country changes the numerical units used for its currency. For example, if a government decided to remove 3 zeros, a future 1.00 dinar unit could become 1 new dinar. Depending on the exact conversion structure adopted, prices, wages, bank balances, contracts, accounting records, and other financial values would normally be converted according to the same ratio. The purpose is usually to simplify transactions, accounting, pricing, and the presentation of the currency, rather than to create wealth overnight for currency holders. That is where the major misconception often appears. Removing zeros does not automatically mean that the purchasing power of the currency increases dramatically. If 1,000 old dinars become 1 new dinar, the number printed on the note changes, but the economic value represented by that amount can remain equivalent after the conversion. In other words, redenomination is primarily a change in the unit of account. It is not automatically a sudden transformation of every dinar holder into a millionaire. A genuine revaluation is different. A revaluation would involve authorities changing the official value of the currency relative to foreign currencies. That could increase the international purchasing power of the domestic currency, but the scale and sustainability of such a move would depend on economic fundamentals, monetary policy, foreign exchange reserves, inflation, fiscal conditions, productivity, trade flows, and confidence in the banking system. For Iraqi dinar followers, this distinction matters because dramatic exchange rate scenarios often assume that Iraq can simply choose a new exchange rate and immediately create enormous increases in the dollar value of existing dinar holdings. Monetary authorities do not operate in that way. A currency's official exchange rate has consequences across the entire economy. A substantial appreciation would affect imports, exports, government finances, businesses, households, banks, and the central bank's balance sheet. Consider what would happen if the dinar suddenly became dramatically more valuable against the US dollar. Imported goods could become cheaper in dinar terms, which might benefit consumers and businesses that rely heavily on imports. However, Iraqi exporters and producers competing with foreign products could face challenges because their goods would become relatively more expensive in international markets. Government revenues, particularly where contracts and oil revenues are connected to foreign currencies, would also need to be considered carefully. There is another major issue: the supply of physical currency. Iraq has a large quantity of dinar banknotes circulating throughout the economy. If authorities wanted to introduce a new currency structure, they would need to manage the transition carefully. That could involve printing new notes, exchanging old notes, updating banking systems, changing ATMs and payment systems, converting accounting records, educating the public, and establishing a timetable for withdrawing or exchanging older denominations. This is why the phrase "dropping the zeros" should not automatically be interpreted as a secret or sudden currency windfall. A formal redenomination would normally be a major policy project requiring extensive preparation and public communication. It would affect virtually every part of the domestic monetary system. There is also a practical reason why central banks are generally cautious about dramatic exchange rate changes. Currency values influence inflation and expectations. If households and businesses suddenly believe that the currency will appreciate substantially, they may change how they save, spend, borrow, and price goods. If the policy is not supported by economic fundamentals, the initial effect may not be sustainable. For Iraq, the broader economic picture, therefore, matters much more than any single exchange rate number. Oil remains central to government revenues and foreign exchange earnings. At the same time, Iraq has been working to modernize its banking sector, strengthen compliance, improve financial transparency, and expand integration with the international financial system. These developments are relevant because a stronger and more credible financial system can improve confidence in the domestic currency over time. For short-term observers and Iraqi Dinar followers, the most important takeaway is that discussions about removing zeros should be treated as a monetary policy issue rather than as proof of an imminent windfall. Unless the Central Bank of Iraq or another competent Iraqi authority formally announces a specific currency reform, the exact timing, conversion ratio, and exchange rate consequences remain uncertain. The difference between an official announcement and speculation is particularly important in the currency market. Online discussions can move quickly, and statements can sometimes be repeated without their original context. A comment suggesting that authorities might eventually remove zeros is not the same as an official decision to launch a redenomination program. Likewise, a hypothetical exchange rate should not be interpreted as a confirmed future rate. For the long term, however, currency reform could become relevant if Iraq continues improving its economic and financial infrastructure. A successful reform would likely require careful coordination between monetary policy, fiscal policy, banking sector development, payment systems, and public communication. The objective would be to create a more efficient and stable monetary environment rather than simply changing the numbers printed on banknotes. Another important consideration is public confidence. Any currency reform depends heavily on whether people understand the conversion and trust the institutions implementing it. If a redenomination were introduced, citizens would need clear information about how old notes convert into new units, how bank deposits are treated, how salaries and contracts are adjusted, and how prices are displayed during the transition. Without confidence and transparency, even technically sound monetary reforms could create confusion. So, when we return to the original question, would Iraq leave all the zeros on existing notes and suddenly change the exchange rate to something like $1 per dinar? The responsible answer is that there is no basis in the information provided here to treat that scenario as an established policy. It remains a hypothetical outcome discussed by currency followers, not a confirmed monetary decision. The alternative scenario, removing zeros, also needs to be understood correctly. If Iraq eventually pursued redenomination, the key question would not simply be how many zeros disappear from the notes. The real questions would involve the conversion ratio, implementation timetable, treatment of bank deposits and contracts, relationship with the existing exchange rate framework, and the economic conditions surrounding the reform. For holders of Iraqi dinars, the best approach is therefore to focus on official information rather than predictions about extraordinary returns. Watch for formal statements from the Central Bank of Iraq, Iraqi government institutions, credible financial publications, and internationally recognized economic organizations. Pay attention to actual policy changes involving the banking sector, exchange rate management, inflation, reserves, fiscal policy, and financial system modernization. Those indicators provide much more useful information than isolated claims about a specific future exchange rate. The broader message is that Iraq's currency story is ultimately an economic story. The strength and credibility of the dinar will depend on the country's monetary framework, fiscal discipline, financial institutions, economic diversification, external trade, and public confidence. Whether Iraq eventually changes its currency structure, adjusts its exchange rate framework, or maintains the existing system, such decisions would need to be evaluated in the context of these underlying fundamentals. For now, the discussion about leaving the zeros on or removing them should be viewed as an important educational topic, not as confirmation of a guaranteed revaluation. A future currency reform could take many forms, and its actual impact would depend entirely on the policy details. announced by Iraqi authorities. As always, we will continue to follow developments surrounding the Iraqi dinar, Iraq's banking reforms, exchange rate policy, and the broader economy. Make sure to subscribe to Iraqi Dinar News and like the video so you can stay informed with responsible and factual updates as new information becomes available. Remember, this content is provided for informational and educational purposes only and should not be considered financial advice. Always conduct your own research and consult a qualified financial professional before making financial decisions.